there's two questions today for consideration that I'd like for each of us to think about. And we'll go into a little more detail, but they are. The first one is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? And the second one is who will go? So, as we think about these things, and the first one being, is there not a cause? Often we're faced with challenges that seem more than we can handle. Most are small and rarely something that might be considered life-altering, but we make decisions every day. We make decisions, as those of us that have raised kids, you kind of learn, you pick your battles, you can't always say no, even though you may want to. We learn from our mistakes, or at least I have. These are everyday decisions. That's not what we're talking about here today. What we're considering here today are battles that we should and can fight for the Lord. And that's when we should ask ourselves, or those around us, is there not a cause? Isn't there a cause in the thing? Isn't there a purpose in what we're doing? And so I'd like to turn, we're not going to read this, but if you turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and it's a passage of Scripture that I would dare say everyone is familiar with. We're not going to read all of this, but there's some things that we want to try to get out of this. This is the story of David and Goliath. But what we're trying to remember, and I want you to remember this, is there not a cause? When we think about these things, what is the Goliath in your life, and is it worth the fight? As we think about this, and as we think about how we would serve the Lord. So we'll read a few of these scriptures. We're not going to read all this. We all, like I said earlier, we all are familiar with David and Goliath and what happened there, but there's a few things that we'd just like to take a look at this morning. So they're in verse 1 of chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochem, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shokah and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. So there's a battle that's about to occur, or at least they feel like that there's a battle here that's going to occur. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. So apparently they were getting their armies ready. They were on each side, and they would fight eventually. The purpose, I guess, was to fight in the middle of that valley. Verse 4, and there went out a champion in the midst of all this, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing of shekel shield went before him. So as you think about this, you can only imagine, if you imagine this person standing in front of you, his height, and if I've calculated this right, he's described as standing about 9 feet 9 inches tall. It's extremely tall. He's wearing a coat, it's called the coat of mail. If I figured the weight of it, it's about 125 pounds. Can you imagine that? I mean, there's nobody in here that's quite that tall, not even close to it, but even if you were carrying half that weight, it'd be hard to do anything, wouldn't it? His spear would have weighed about 15 pounds. As I thought about this, if I saw this person, it'd be pretty frightening, wouldn't it? Humanly speaking. I will say that when I first read this, I thought, well, maybe he was standing on something. How could somebody be that tall? I don't know how else to take this except to take it literally. I will say that there was in the early 1900s, I think he was born in 1911, there was a man named Robert Wadlow. He's called the Alton Giant. There's actually pictures of him. His height was 8 feet 11 inches tall. So it is possible for somebody, not likely, but it is possible for somebody to potentially be that tall. So we see this giant, and we see him, and he comes out. And so let's go back to 1 Samuel there in verse 8. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel. So he would come out each day and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Why are you here? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. And if he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. So it's an unusual battle that's about to occur here. He presented himself to the army of Israel each morning and each evening for 40 days. And this was what he would declare. Send somebody out. Just one person. We'll get this over with. Kind of an unusual thing. And I'm sure Saul and his army, they probably thought they were going to be in a battle by now. And now it's like we have to decide, do we want to go out and fight? Do we want to send one person out to fight this person? So, verse 15, let's see, well, before we get there, and the Philistines, let's see, we read verse 10. Verse 11, when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Were they thinking that they're part of God's army at this time? Probably not. But they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And possibly maybe they entertained the idea of fighting. Maybe they thought, well, what would it take to fight this person? But I think what they determined was there's no way we could win. And humanly speaking, if you were looking at this and you think about it, with all this armor on, how would you fight him? I mean, you could probably outrun him, but you're not, if your spears or swords or whatever are probably not going to penetrate this armor that he had on. So it was a daunting task. But with God, all things are possible. And this is God's army we're talking about. But they forgot about that, didn't they? The only thing they saw was this giant with all this armor on, and there's no way that I can defeat him, humanly speaking. But with God, all things are possible, right? So, skip down to verse 15. Well, let's read a few more verses. Verse 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judea, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man, and in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul in the battle. So there was 3 of Jesse's sons. He had 8 sons. 3 of them were in the battle. They were part of this army. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shema. And David was the youngest. And so we have this situation here. In verse 15 it says, But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So what apparently, if we know where the best, verse 54, we won't turn there, but it said I think David had a tent there. And I think it was just his normal routine. Every few days, he would come, bring some food and whatever for his brothers. Apparently, the army of Saul, they didn't have any way of feeding some of them. So he would show up every few days and help his brothers. And then I think also Jesse probably wanted to know what was going on. Are my sons okay? How's the war going? What's happening? So David would report back to his father. So this was kind of his normal routine. I don't know how often he did it, but apparently when he did come, he never had the opportunity to see Goliath. So David, being a spirit-led young man, and what up until this point in his life, every decision had to be in the will of God and for the glory of God. So he looked at things a little differently than some of the others did. So we get down, let's drop down to verse 24. Well, let's go, just look at verse 16, and then we'll go to 24. Verse 16, and the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. So it's every morning, every evening, he came out and did this thing and challenged someone to come out and fight him. So we get to verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him. They didn't even want to get close to him and were sore afraid. So we see that again. They just didn't get it at this point and realized, they thought, there's no way I can beat this guy. And perhaps Saul must have thought the same thing, because he probably thought, who could I send out there? Who could really take on this guy? And you can imagine it'd be like a tank. I mean, he was so well armored that there's no way that anything they had could pierce that armor. But there was one spot, wasn't there? There's probably one spot that he didn't have totally protected. Anyway, and so verse 25, and the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up surely to defy Israel? Is he come up? And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free to Israel. So I think what was going on here was they were probably trying to talk somebody else in the group to try it. You got to try it. Just go try it. Look what you can get if you do happen to defeat him. And David was hearing, he was there, and he heard all these things. Verse 26, and David spake to the men. Here's this young man. He's a lot younger than the rest of them. He's not part of this army. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine and taketh away the reproach from Israel? In other words, I don't think there was any doubt in his mind that somebody could kill this guy. So what would happen to him? What would they get? And for who this is uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God. See, they forgot this, didn't they? They forgot what they represented. They forgot who they were. This is the armies of the living God. And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so it shall be done to the man that killeth him. In other words, you would be rewarded, and greatly rewarded. But I don't think that was David's purpose in any of this. It's like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Does he know who we are? Does he know what's behind us? God. And what's interesting in verse 28, and Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. In other words, he heard what David was saying. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. So he was angry with David, wasn't he? Why'd you come? Who's taking care of the sheep? You just wanted to see what was going on. Nothing was going on, was it? What he saw was men afraid when they should have been bold, because God was on their side. And he didn't understand it, And so his response to his brother there is in verse 29, and that's where we want to get to. And David said, what have I now done? What did I do? Did I not speak the truth? Did I not say, aren't we the army of God? What have I now done? And is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? What a blessing this young man should have been to these people. I mean, to take Saul and all his army and these mature men and this young man, this immature young man, to point out to them, is there not a cause? Is there not a very good reason to accept this challenge of Goliath? It's like sometimes children, younger people, there's no filter sometimes. They'll say just about anything. And I think David was like that. It's like we've been taught. He knew about God. I'm sure Jesse had taught his sons all these things of the history of God's chosen people. And he's like, it just blew his mind. Why are we worried about this? And so as we think about this, and we know, and you know the rest of the story. We're not going to read it, but you know what David did, and he volunteered. They tried to put armor on him. It was too big. He didn't need it. He just needed a few small stones, didn't he? Actually, just one's all he really needed. And he slung that stone, and apparently it probably hit in the one spot that maybe wasn't totally protected by all this armor. He kills Goliath, cuts his head off, and his Eliab and all the King Saul's men sitting there watching this. How do you think they thought? Do you think that it maybe caused them to think, maybe God is on our side? Maybe there is something to this. And so as we think about this, and as we ask ourselves this question, is there not a cause? Are we bold enough to take a stand? Bold enough to think that with God, all things are possible? God can give us the strength to endure and the courage to stand, can He? If there is a cause, then we should be willing to take a stand. We should be willing to go when needed. Be what I call a go-to person. Be that person with a reputation that you can always be counted on. Do you have that kind of reputation? So, if there is a cause, if there is a purpose in what we're trying to do here today and every day with our life, what's next? What is next, And, Acts 9, verse 6, if you'll turn there. Acts chapter 9 and verse 6. If we've determined that there is a cause, there indeed is a cause, there is indeed a purpose. Here we see Paul. He's on the road to Damascus. He's been struck blind. Chapter 9 and verse 6, we see him. And he, trembling and astonished, said, this is Paul speaking, Lord, he knew who did this to him. Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? It's not, why'd you do this? What's going on? Shouldn't it be somebody else? I'm coming here to persecute Christians. Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, arise and go in the city, and it shall be told thee what to do. So if there is a cause, then this leads us to the second question. And I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Then said I, this is Isaiah speaking, here am I, send me. In just moments before this, we won't read this whole account, but we see in verse 5 there, Isaiah declaring, woe is me! Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips. And then just moments later, what does he do? His response, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Here am I, send me. Can we say that? Why was God asking him this question? Oftentimes questions are asked, but the person asking the question often knows the answer. God knew the answer. It's interesting, in the New Testament, a lot of times when the Pharisees or whoever challenged Jesus, they would ask him some question. His response a lot of times was a question, wasn't it? Because you ought to know the answer, And so, why was God asking him? Isaiah was unworthy. Woe is me. Yet, realizing his shortcomings, he still understood that God could still use him to make him a vessel of honor. And that's the way we should be. I'm not probably the best person to do this or do a lot of things. And we all think these things. We think there's somebody else that's better. But God can still use us. The nation at that time needed the Lord, and the Lord wanted a servant to minister to the people. Isaiah volunteered to be that servant. I don't think he had any clue how it was going to be done or what to be done. But God would lead him. The Lord would tell him what he needed to do. Never underestimate what God can do with one person willing to do the work. You know, maybe your life, don't always believe that there's somebody else that could do things better than you, more qualified. If you think that way, it's going to get you out of just about everything. And it will. Sometimes you just need to step up. And even if you don't, maybe somebody could do it better, but maybe that's not what the Lord intended. You know, maybe the Lord intended for you to do that, and you grow and you learn how to do these things. You know, I've talked about it before in our Sunday school class, but when you consider the 12 apostles, God used ordinary people to accomplish things so that when they succeeded the task at hand, who got the glory? God did. People looked and said, there's no way Peter or John or Matthew, how are these people doing these things? Because the power of God was within them. Jesus Christ used them. You know, if I've thought about this, if Jesus, when he began his ministry, had decided, if he told the group of people, he said, I need 12 men to help me. If you're interested, give me your resume. I doubt if their resume would look very good, would it? A fisherman, tax collector. They're unlearned people, not necessarily well educated, not influential, just ordinary people. I'm an ordinary person. God can use even that as a vessel of honor. And so I would encourage us, if we're willing to ask the first question, is there not a cause? Then why can't we just say, why can't it be me? Why can't God use me in some way? And he can. I found a quote, and it seems to apply when we're reluctant somewhat to press on for the Lord. And I want to read this. And so here it goes. How light every burden, how pleasant every yoke. Duties become privileges. Difficulties vanish. Fears are quelled. Shame is humbled. Delay is rebuked. And all on flame for Jesus. The pardoned, justified, adopted child exclaims, Here, Lord, am I, a living sacrifice, thine for time and thine for eternity. Can we say that? Here am I. Just use me, Lord, in some way. Use me. I have a cause. I have a purpose. Use me. So the two questions that I'd like for us to, if you don't get anything out of this, at least if you walk away, is there not a cause, and who will go for us? And can the Lord send I? And if you're here today and you not know how you stand with God, the message this morning can also apply to you. There is a cause, and today that cause may just be you. Is the Lord speaking to you today? Are you burdened about something? Salvation, church membership. Is your life not what it should be? Blessed is the person that can put their faith and trust in Him for the peace that passes all understanding. Maybe your life's not what it should have been up to this point. It doesn't mean you can't change things. It takes courage to step out and a commitment. It takes determination that I should serve to the best of my ability from this day forward. I've made a lot of mistakes, but from this day forward, I'm going to serve God. Because there is a cause. There should be a purpose in my life. Two verses and then we'll close. Joshua chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15. Joshua 24 and 15. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, this is Joshua speaking, we will serve the Lord. And that's all we can do is just serve the Lord to the best of our ability. And then one other verse, Psalms 115 and verse 18. Psalms 115 and verse 18. But we will bless the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. Praise the Lord. So I trust this has been a blessing to you. I hope that the Lord can somehow use this, whether you're saved or lost. I trust that the Lord He can and will, but we need to realize and understand that there should be a purpose in our life, and there is, and that's serving God. So